The Byzantine Empire, often called the Eastern Roman Empire or simply Byzantium, existed from 330 to 1453. With its capital founded at Constantinople by Constantine I.R. 306 to 337, the empire varied in size over the centuries, at one time or another possessing territories located in Italy, Greece, the Balkans, Levant, Asia Minor, and North Africa. Byzantium was a Christian state with Greek as the official language. The Byzantines developed their own political systems, religious practices, art and architecture, which, although significantly influenced by the Greco-Roman cultural tradition, were distinct and not merely a continuation of ancient Rome. The Byzantine Empire was the longest-lasting medieval power, and its influence continues today, especially in the religion, art, architecture, and law of many Western states, Eastern and Central Europe, and Russia. Constantinople. The beginnings of the Byzantine Empire lie in the decision of Roman Emperor Constantine I to relocate the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Byzantium on May 11, 330. The popular name Constantinople or City of Constantine soon replaced the emperor's own official choice of New Rome. The new capital had an excellent natural harbor on the Golden Horn Inlet and, straddled on the border between Europe and Asia, could control the passage of ships through the Bosphorus from the Aegean to the Black Sea, linking lucrative trade between West and East. A great chain stretched across the Golden Horn's entrance, and the construction of the massive Theodosian walls between 410 and 413 meant that the city was able to withstand time and again concerted attacks from both sea and land. Over the centuries, as more spectacular buildings were added, the cosmopolitan city became one of the finest of any epoch and certainly the richest, most lavish and most important Christian city in the world. Byzantine emperors. The Byzantine emperor or Basilius, or more rarely Basilissa for empress, resided in the magnificent Great Palace of Constantinople and ruled as an absolute monarch over a vast empire. As such, the Basilius needed the assistance of an expert government and a widespread and efficient bureaucracy. Although an absolute ruler, an emperor was expected, by his government, people and the church, to rule wisely and justly. Even more importantly, an emperor had to have military success as the army remained the most powerful institution in Byzantium in real terms. The generals in Constantinople and the provinces could, and did, remove an emperor who failed to defend the empire's borders or who brought economic catastrophe. Still, in the normal run of events, the emperor was commander-in-chief of the army, head of the church and government. He controlled the state finances and appointed or dismissed nobles at will. Few rulers before or since have ever wielded such power. The emperor's image appeared on Byzantine coins, which were also used to show a chosen successor, often the eldest son, but not always, as there were no set rules for succession. Emperors were thought to have been chosen by God to govern, but a magnificent crown and robes of Tyrian purple helped further bolster the right to rule. Another marketing strategy was to copy the reign names of illustrious predecessors, Constantine being a particular favorite. Even usurpers, typically military men of power and success, very often sought to legitimize their position by marrying a member of their predecessor's family. Thus, through a carefully orchestrated continuity of dynasties, ritual, costume, and names, the institution of the emperor was able to last for 12 centuries. Byzantine society. The Byzantines gave great importance to the family name, inherited wealth, and the respectable birth of an individual. The individuals in the higher levels of society possessed these three things. Wealth came from land ownership or the administration of land under an individual administrator's jurisdiction. However, there was no aristocracy of blood as such in Byzantine society, and both patronage and education were a means to climb the social ladder. In addition, the dispensing of favors, lands, and titles by emperors, as well as indiscriminate demotions and the hazards of foreign invasions and wars, all meant that the individual components of the nobility were not static and families rose and fell over the centuries. Rank was visible to all members of society through the use of titles, seals, insignia, particular clothing, and personal jewelry. Most in the lower classes would have followed the profession of their parents, but inheritance, the accumulation of wealth, and a lack of any formal prohibition for one class to move to another did at least offer a small possibility for a person to better their social position. There were workers with better jobs such as those who worked in legal affairs, administration, and commerce, not a very esteemed way to make a living for the Byzantines. On the next rung down were artisans, then farmers who owned their own small parcels of land, then the largest group, those who worked the land of others, and finally, slaves who were typically prisoners of war but nowhere near as numerous as free laborers. The role of Byzantine women, as with the men, depended on their social rank. Aristocratic women were expected to manage the home and care for the children. Although able to own property, they could not hold public office and spent their free time weaving, shopping, going to church or reading, although they had no formal education. Widows became the guardian of their children and could inherit equally with their brothers. Many women worked, as men, in agriculture and various manufacturing industries and food services. Women could own their own land and businesses, and some would have improved their social position through marriage. The least respected professions were, as elsewhere, prostitutes and actresses. Territories of the Byzantine Empire. The geographical extent of the Byzantine Empire changed over the centuries as the military successes and failures of individual emperors fluctuated. Territories which were held in the earlier part of the empire's history included Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine. Greece was less important in practical terms than it was as a symbol of the Byzantines' view of themselves as the true heirs of the Greco-Roman culture. Italy and Sicily had to be defended, ultimately unsuccessfully, against the ambitions of the popes and the Normans. The Balkans up to the Danube River were important throughout, and Asia Minor up to the Black Sea coast in the north and Armenia in the east was a major source of wealth, but both these regions would require regular and vigorous defense against various perennial enemies. As the political map was constantly redrawn with the rise and fall of neighboring empires, notable events included Anastasio's I, 491–518, successfully defending the empire against both the Persians and Bulgars. Justinian I, aided by his gifted general Belisarius, c. 500–565, won back territories in North Africa, Spain, and Italy which had been lost by the Western emperors. The Lombards in Italy and the Slavs in the Balkans made inroads into the empire during the second half of the 6th century, a situation eventually reversed by Heraclius, or 610–641, effectively bringing the Persian Sasanian Empire to an end with his victory at Nineveh in 627. The Islamic conquests of the 7th and 8th century robbed the empire of its territories in the Levant, including Jerusalem in 637, North Africa and Eastern Asia Minor. At least, though, the empire stood firm as a bulwark against the Arab expansion into Europe, with Constantinople twice withstanding determined Arab sieges, 674–8 and 717–18. The Byzantine Empire was shaken to its foundations, though. Then in the 9th century, the Bulgars made significant incursions into the northern areas of the empire. A resurgence in Byzantine fortunes came with the inappropriately named Macedonian dynasty, 867–1057. The founder of the dynasty, Basil R. 867–886, reconquered southern Italy, dealt with the troublesome Cretan pirates, and gained victories against the Arabs on Cyprus, mainland Greece and in Dalmatia. The very next emperor, Leo VI, R. 886–912, lost most of the gains, but the mid-10th century saw victories in Muslim-controlled Mesopotamia. The Byzantine Church. Paganism continued to be practiced for centuries after the foundation of Byzantium, but it was Christianity which became the defining feature of Byzantine culture, profoundly affecting its politics, foreign relations, and art and architecture. The church was headed by the Patriarch or Bishop of Constantinople, who was appointed or removed by the emperor. Local bishops, who presided over larger towns and their surrounding territories and who represented both the church and emperor, had considerable wealth and powers in their local communities. Christianity, then, became an important common denominator which helped bind together diverse cultures into a single empire which included Christian Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, Georgians, and many other minorities, and those of other faiths such as Jews and Muslims who were permitted to freely practice their religion. Byzantine art. Byzantine artists moved away from the naturalism of the classical tradition towards the more abstract and universal, displaying a definite preference for two-dimensional representations. The rarity of signatures on works of art produced before the 13th century suggests that artists did not enjoy a high social status. Artworks which promoted a religious message, principally the need for salvation and a reinforcement of faith, were produced in huge numbers, and chief amongst these were wall mosaics, wall paintings, and icons. Although icons could take almost any form of material, the most popular were small painted wooden panels. Designed to be carried or hung on walls, they were made using the encaustic technique where colored pigments were mixed with wax and burned into the wood as an inlay. With the purpose of facilitating communication between the onlooker and the divine, the single figures are typically full frontal with a nimbus or halo around them to emphasize their holiness. Byzantine mosaics, best seen today in the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul or the Church of San Vitali in Ravenna, represented holy figures, emperors and empresses, church officials, and scenes of daily life, especially in agriculture. Large-scale sculpture seems to have been less popular than in earlier antiquity, but sculpted marble sarcophagi were produced in great numbers. Finally, metalwork, especially incorporating enamel work and cabochon semi-precious stones, was a Byzantine speciality, and artisans produced many high-quality and intricately designed plates, cups, jewelry of all kinds, book covers, especially for Bibles, and reliquaries, boxes for keeping holy relics. Byzantine architecture. Byzantine architects continued to employ the classical orders in their buildings and took ideas from the Near East, amongst other places. Designs became more eclectic than in antiquity, especially given the common habit of reusing the materials from older buildings for new structures. There was, too, a definite emphasis on function over form and a greater concern with the interiors rather than exteriors of buildings. Continuing to build such quintessentially Roman structures as arched aqueducts, amphitheaters, hippodromes, baths, and villas, the Byzantines would add to the repertoire with their domed churches, walled monasteries, and more sophisticated fortification walls. Favored building materials were large bricks with mortar and concrete for the hidden core of walls. Ashlar stone blocks were used in more prestigious public buildings, while marble, used more sparingly than in earlier Roman times, was generally reserved for columns, door and window frames, and other decorative elements. Roofs were of timber, while interior walls were frequently covered in plaster, stucco, thin marble plaques, paintings, and mosaics. The largest, most important and still most famous Byzantine building is the Hagia Sophia of Constantinople, dedicated to the Holy Wisdom, Hagia Sophia, of God. Built anew in 532 to 537, its basic rectangular shape measures 74.6 by 69.7 meters, 245 by 229 feet, and its huge domed ceiling is 55 meters above the floor, spanning 31.8 meters in diameter. Resting on four massive arches with four supporting pendentives, the dome was a spectacular architectural achievement for the period. The Hagia Sophia remained the biggest church in the world until the 16th century and was one of the most decorated with superb glittering mosaics and wall paintings. Christian churches, in general, were one of the Byzantines' greatest contributions to architecture, especially the use of the dome. The cross-in-square plan became the most common, with the dome built over four supporting arches. The square base of the building then branched into bays which might themselves have a half or full dome ceiling. Another common feature is a central apse with two side apses at the eastern end of the church. Over time, the central dome was raised ever higher on a polygonal drum, which in some churches is so high it has the appearance of a tower. Many churches, especially basilicas, had alongside them a baptistry, usually octagonal, and sometimes a mausoleum for the founder of the church and their descendants. Such Byzantine design features would go on to influence Orthodox Christian architecture and so are still seen today in churches worldwide.